Here he comes.
Mr. Spacey?
Let's listen.
Mr. Cameron? Any comments? Everyone's staying back.
Kevin, do you think he gave consent?
What really happened?
All right, so clearly not taking any questions, but you know, it's interesting. When he first sat down in that courtroom, Rikki, and you and I were watching, he was sitting there with his attorney, and the attorney mentioned something to him, and Mr. Spacey smiled, and I kind of had a feeling that that was going to be a moment, because now all of a sudden on my news feeds popping up, the headline, Kevin Spacey all smiles as he sits in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, I think, a refrain that you're going to hear. And that's why I was sort of asking you about the strength of the prosecution's case, because the narrative might be, look, it's not that strong, and that's why he feels comfortable, relaxed, sitting in the courtroom.
Well, yeah, let me say this. From having been on both sides as a prosecutor and a defense lawyer, the defendant is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he frowns and looks down, well, then
he did it, right?
Right, he did it. If he smiles, then is he confident or is he just nervous? There is no win for the defendant on demeanor. And the Twitter feed will go wild, and everyone will be talking about this smile. And the reality is that it has no reality.
Right.
It has absolutely no reality.
And I'm glad you're addressing that, because I worry that sometimes that becomes the narrative in social media.
I think, but in his particular case, it's sort of compounded by that video that he released
that
earlier,
crazy video.
where he was playing Frank Underwood, the character that he played in House of Cards, who was not a nice guy.
No.
In the dialogue, there was, one could interpret as a lot of double entendre. It could be Frank Underwood talking about returning to the White House, because if you're unfamiliar, he was the president, or it could be, Kevin Spacey talking about the allegations against him. I don't think that helps. But what I want to ask you, Rikki, is that just a bunch of sort of garbage in the air, like, whether or not he smiled for 3 seconds, or could that later on have an impact on his case?
I think that could have an impact on his case, because as we know, when you record a video, it is forever. And so there is the opportunity, which I do not think will ever happen, if Kevin Spacey were to testify, which I do not think he can. And the reason I say that is because it opens up the question for him of other possible allegations against him, whether or not they're charged. But it's fodder for cross-examination. I'm sure the prosecutor is going to try to do something with that video to make it look like some kind of an admission and put it in their own case.
Wouldn't they be derelict if they didn't introduce it at least to ask him what he was talking about?
Well, that's if he testifies. But, if he doesn't testify, the question is there something in there that the prosecution can say is some kind of admission of guilt, and the defense will say it's ambiguous, that you can't introduce this, and that there'll be definitely a fight about that at the time of trial.
I want to ask you another question about one of the components of this case. You talked about the amount of drinking that they both did.
Yes.
Is it required to prove some sort of intent? It's one thing if you and I decide to go to a bar and we're both drinking a lot, versus you're trying to get me drunk.
I'm buying you a lot of drinks?
Yeah.
I suppose that definitely plays into it. There's no question. I mean, certainly that's going to be the prosecution's theory, that in 70 minutes he got the kid blind drunk, and the whole purpose of that was in order to sexually assault him.
Right.
And that's going to be part of the prosecution's theory of the case. And the defense parry to that, in the thrust and parry, is that, well, no, they were both drinking. Everyone was drinking. And they were, they're standing at the bar. It's not like this young man was falling down drunk.
Right. So is there a defense if part of Kevin Spacey's argument is we were both drunk. We were both silly. We were both doing things that are out of character.
Well, or maybe not out of character. We were both having a good time. It's another night at the club car. This is a young man who worked there. The bartenders, are now all deaf, dumb, and blind, right? None of them remember any of this. And, of course, the bartenders would have known. He worked there as a busboy. He was off duty at the time. And they would have known that he was 18 years old. So they cannot serve him at that point. So there's also that question.
Yeah.
The other question, which I find the most intriguing of this entire case, even more than the craziness of texting the girlfriend simultaneously with an alleged sexual assault, which I find bizarre beyond words, is the idea that a woman, we don't know if she's young or old, a woman came up to the accuser when Kevin Spacey went to the bathroom and said, "Get out of here," you know, and recognized that this young man was in trouble. Well, we don't know who that woman is, and neither does anybody else.
Wow.
So that's, and now...
So is that according to the victim in this case?
It's according to the investigation from what I've read and what I've heard from the audio tape. So what you wind up with, if someone now 2.5 years later says, "Oh, I'm that woman," well, how much credence do you put in that when you look at the world of people who want to be in the limelight? I was the woman who was the savior. Well, where's she been for 2.5 years? If you're someone who's concerned because you've witnessed a sexual assault and you get the kid out of there, don't you say something to the bartender or something to the owner? So I think the mystery woman rescuer is a fact in favor of the defense.